Good afternoon. My name is Grant Irvin. I serve as the City of Pittsburgh's Chief Resilience Officer. We're here today to announce a piece of research that we've been working on called the Marshall Plan for Middle America. I will be serving as the MC for the event today and would like to introduce our speakers and provide a couple of remarks before I turn it over to them. Our speakers today will be C.B. Bhattacharya from the Center for Sustainable Business at the University of Pittsburgh, Leslie Marshall, also with the University of Pittsburgh Center for Sustainable Business, Lindsay Powell with the Mayor's Office of the City of Pittsburgh, and Mayor Peduto. The linkage between climate action and economic justice has never been more clear. Both issues require us to act with haste and deliberation and require that we build, or in some cases rebuild, trust in institutions and in each other. Over the course of the last 9 months, roughly parallel with the trajectory of the pandemic, we've sought to proactively reach beyond our boundaries to formulate a positive strategy to rebuild our economy and concurrently address the environmental and social challenges felt throughout the Ohio Valley's rural, urban, and suburban communities. It's our belief that we can rebuild our region's energy ecosystem by helping to lead a just transition. From the foundations of the fossil economy towards a globally competitive regional ecosystem that invests in renewable energy, advanced energy technologies, and is led by a high-performing workforce that is supported across the communities of the region. In the last few months, we have convened a sampling of voices that represent academia, local government, corporate, capital investment, community leaders, and labor, to listen and learn from their stories. These stories exemplify the clean energy transition that is taking place right here in our own backyard. We've hosted 3 city-to-city convenings with major cities of the Ohio Valley, numerous one-on-one discussions with fellow city practitioners, engaged community leaders like the Reimagine Appalachian campaign, and labor leaders like the Heartland Investors Network and Steel Valley Authority, a collection of union pension funds that are guiding the transition through the development of environmental, social, and governance, or ESG strategies. And we've conducted detailed research, which we will soon learn more about from the team at the University of Pittsburgh and many of their collaborators. A few things I'd like to note about the Marshall Plan for Middle America concept. First, the need for a proactive, clean energy strategy is now. It's imperative that we begin the process of harnessing our resources and addressing not only the challenge of climate change, but that we link that work with economic opportunity. In fact, if we fail to act, if we fail to lead, our region will be left behind. The investments and strategies that you will hear about are well within our reach, many of which are taking root right now, and more important examples are coming online each day. What we need is the ability to advance these initiatives at scale. Second, climate action is economic development. We will continue to see further contraction in the fossil energy sector. What we need now is to take proactive steps to take advantage of the economic opportunities that are in front of us. Finally, this strategy will require us to engage new frameworks and terminology that might not be familiar to us, like the circular economy, impact investing, cross-sector collaboration, and workforce training that integrates not only project labor agreements, but also diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts together. With that, I'd like to turn it over to C.B. Bhattacharya from the Center for Sustainable Business, who will share a bit about the center and introduce the research led by Leslie Marshall. This will be followed by my colleague Lindsay Powell and Mayor Peduto. CB, we'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Grant, Mayor Peduto, and everybody else. Very warm welcome. I am C.B. Bhattacharya. I direct the Center for Sustainable Business that was founded last year with a grant from the Heinz Endowments. And our purpose, very simply, is to catalyze the acceleration and the scale to sustainable business models. So being from a business school, we work fundamentally with businesses, but as I shall elaborate, there are several other stakeholders that come into the picture in order to enable this very, very important change that we need in our society today. We catalyze this change via 3 interconnected legs of a stool, and those would be knowledge creation, teaching and training, and thought leadership. With regard to knowledge creation, we write research, we publish research, which we disseminate to the world for anybody who wants to get that knowledge and act on it in their organizations. So what might be an example of a research question here is kind of, how does diversity and inclusion actually kind of translate into a better organization, into a stronger organization? Does it have any linkages with financial performance? We don't know that much about it, but here we are. We want to engage in this kind of work and disseminate it to the world. The second thing, teaching and training, is where we bring together various parts of our university to create what we call a new generation of a sustainability generalist. Right now, the case for sustainability is well known, but most of us don't know what to do. We know why it's important, but we don't know what to do about it in our sphere of influence. We are trying to change that through educating our undergraduate and graduates, and so that when they get into the job arena, from day one, they can kind of participate in the sustainability journey so that everybody in an organization can think and act like a sustainability manager rather than believing that this is someone else's problem. Finally, the thought leadership part is where we have been the most active so far amongst all these three streams, so to speak. And in the thought leadership front, we have something unique called a Sustainable Business Forum, which is actually a forum that brings together companies to discuss and embed sustainability into corporate DNA, discuss ways and strategies to embed sustainability into corporate DNA. So we have so far 9 corporate sponsors. I will not name them all, but suffice it to know that we have the likes of BASF, NL, IBM, and PPG. They are all participating in this forum, and we are ongoingly discussing kind of how do we transition and accelerate the change to sustainable business models. The other aspect of the thought leadership, our thought leadership program, is what is germane today, and that is this collaboration with multiple stakeholders, private-public partnerships, if you will. So what we have here with regard to the Marshall Plan for Middle America is our center taking the lead in bringing together different parties, such as the government, the city of Pittsburgh, such as other academic institutions like the Sustainable Development Solutions Network, such as community investors like Steel Valley Authority, and a variety of other actors, because as you perhaps know, partnership is the new leadership. And we want to be at the center of this kind of social change that's happening, and to be able to bring these parties together to make change happen on the ground. And so this is how the Marshall Plan for Middle America, was the idea of this roadmap was conceived amongst these various parties. And we have worked very hard for the last 4 or 5 months to present to you this report and this roadmap, which all credit goes to my colleague, Leslie Marshall, Associate Director of the Center of the University of Pittsburgh, to whom I hand over now to talk a bit more about the plan and the roadmap.
Thank you, CB. I also want to emphasize that while I appreciate the acknowledgement of the hard work, it's truly a collaborative effort. There are 11 different co-authors from a variety of institutions that were a part of this report, including across the University of Pittsburgh and the city of Pittsburgh, as well as the University of Massachusetts Amherst. The other stakeholders have also been mentioned. The NL Foundation has also offered scientific expertise here. So this is really my privilege to be able to present the results here, but it's a massive undertaking to put this together. So the Marshall Plan for Middle America, it's a roadmap to guide sustainable regional economic development. And it's really inspired by the effort to invest an incredible amount of money in Europe after World War II as a way to build the European economy. So as we all well know, in our own region, when we look at the Ohio River Valley, which is represented here in the light pink areas of the map, the upper Appalachian region, which is represented in between the red dashed marks on the map here, overlays with much of our Ohio River watershed and many of the major cities and the metropolitan areas, the suburban areas that are captured here in this map as well. In our own region, we are facing this confluence of crises. We are feeling climate change very acutely in our own communities. We are seeing widening gaps in social equity and economic well-being, which are being exacerbated in the face of the COVID-19 pandemic. There is plenty of research independent of this report that shows that we know the types of communities are being hit hardest and continue to be hit hardest by the impact of the pandemic and the current economic crisis and climate change and environmental justice. Our women, our people of color, our immigrant communities, our lower income Americans, and these groups, many of them are cross-cutting in terms of they're found in urban communities and rural communities and suburban communities, as Grant Irvin mentioned at the start here. And they're all part of our Ohio River Valley community, which is also a place where we historically have heavy reliance on the fossil fuel industry. So globally, we're seeing this transition towards investment in renewables and cleaner economies and fuels that are not derived from fossil fuels as a way to combat climate change and many of the injustices that co-occur with that. But if we don't make an investment in our community right now, then the communities that are relying on fossil fuels risk falling further behind, because we know that fossil fuels are going to increasingly leave the global economy, the global market, as we move towards addressing the catastrophic effects of climate change. But we see this as an opportunity to marshal investment, a Marshall Plan for Middle America that could rebuild our regional economy. So we have a historic energy and manufacturing and industry presence here that's really driven the US economy. Why don't we use this opportunity to drive investment across our 4 state regions? We think about that 4 state region, we're really looking at Kentucky, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia, and build out that future energy economy right here in our communities, and do that intentionally. We have an opportunity here to redress and course correct on persistent economic and social injustices, and to rebuild in a way that is more equitable and is paying attention to those injustices that have persisted for far too long. And I know that Lindsay Powell will speak more to those pieces here in a bit, but I just want to emphasize that we see all 3 of these persistent challenges as being part of our opportunity here in terms of driving investment. So a Marshall Plan is really a roadmap for transforming the regional economy. So what we've tried to do here is think about what's that picture of what's possible. So our colleagues at the Reimagine Appalachia campaign have also undertaken this sort of effort to reimagine the future of our 4-state region. And we see that in the Marshall Plan side as having sort of 5 key elements. What are the pieces that need to be part of that puzzle to realize this investment in energy infrastructure to drive the future? One of them is reliable research and evidence to help chart the path forward. We have a region that's full of academic universities, research institutions, and think tanks that are already doing incredible research in these communities on these issues. That's an incredibly important piece of the puzzle. Number 2, we need governing institutions with identifiable infrastructure needs and community ties to be part of this conversation, to be part of the plan. Each of our communities has unique localized demands. They have unique context, but when we work together collaboratively across the region, there's quite a lot we can accomplish that we cannot accomplish alone. Number 3, we need companies who are ready to invest in long-term market development and more sustainable business practices. We need the companies that are going to help build out that energy infrastructure. We need companies who are going to commit to climate change reduction targets. We need companies that are going to commit to equitable workforce development and paths to a sustainable economic future for all. And number 4, we need capital to finance development. So this is going to take massive infrastructure, is going to require a lot of funding, which I'm going to get to here in just a moment, but we need to marshal those capital resources to front those costs. And number 5, we need community-based oversight and transparent dialogue throughout the process. So I want to emphasize here that this roadmap is just the starting point for the conversation. We see this as a document that can spark that conversation. it's not the end of the conversation, it's just the beginning. So we need to be able to use this to put together more transparent processes, to develop those community relationships, and to find avenues for people to meaningfully participate in this as a democratic process. So there's the Marshall Plan, which is about what kind of investment we need, how much we think that would cost, what's the potential impact, which I'll get to. But there's also the how we're going to actually implement those funds if we can raise them, right? So the vision is to create collaboration for regional development that is cross industry, it's across sectors. So we've identified 5 broad stakeholder groups that are in the report, which all need to be part of this process to really build things out in a sustainable and equitable way to realize those benefits for all. In the report itself, we elaborate here on the role that can be played by research and development institutions, by community organizations, which includes labor unions that have a key role to play in equitable workforce development, by governments, including regulatory agencies. There are some policy and regulatory barriers that exist to expanding renewable energy access in our communities that we need to take under consideration. We need investors to be part of this process, and we need companies to be involved as well. And here we're not just talking about the companies that are going to be driving the adoption of more, driving the adoption of renewables or renewable energy generation, but also working directly with fossil fuel companies who have been embedded for a very long time in the communities where they operate. What is a coal company going to look like in 50 years and 100 years? We want to work with companies now to make that transition happen over a period of time as well. So in the roadmap itself, which is now available on the Center for Sustainable Business website, which we'll link to at the end of this presentation, the roadmap is a 44-page document that goes through each of the bullet points that are highlighted here. And for the purposes of the press conference, I really want to emphasize these 2 that are highlighted in blue. The estimated cost of investment by industry if we're going to reach climate change reduction targets, and the estimated impact in terms of job creation if we're able to hit those targets. So before I present these numbers, I just want to emphasize this analysis was done by one of our co-authors, Dr. Robert Pollan of the University of Massachusetts Amherst. So the real meat of the report is in what is this going to cost? If we're going to meet these targets, right? So if we want to address the issue of climate change, that's a persistent issue, we need to reduce our carbon emissions to get them down to 50% by 2030 and ultimately to 0 by 2050. Our economic analysis, which is performed by Dr. Robert Pollan of the University of Massachusetts Amherst in the Political Economy Research Institute there, he estimates that to make that happen, to reach those goals, we need to invest $60 billion per year in public and private clean energy investments over the next 10 years. So from 2021 to 2030, we need $60 billion per year in public and private clean energy investments if we're going to meet those targets. And that money needs to be invested intentionally if we're also going to address these issues of persistent inequalities and build an economy that's actually inclusive of all of the communities that are part of our region. So of that 60 billion, we estimate that 15 billion needs to come in the form of energy efficiency investments. So this would be building retrofits, industrial efficiency, combined heat and power, electrical grid upgrades, public transportation expansion and upgrades, and expanding high efficiency auto fleets. The other 45 billion needs to come in the form of increased clean renewable supply expansion. So this would be the increase in solar, onshore wind, low emissions bioenergy, geothermal, and small scale hydro. So we need to invest 60 billion per year across our 4 states over the next 10 years to reach these goals. After that, from 2031 to 2050, the estimated need is more on the order of 32 billion per year to meet energy demands for our region at that point. So what's the distribution of this capital stack? Where is this 60 billion per year going to come from? The report itself doesn't specify. It suggests some potential models that could work based on other investment models that either currently exist or have existed in the past. We expect this to depend on a number of factors, and that will include the extent that the federal support for these kinds of projects, state support, private investment, and things like that. So we'll come back to that later in the Q&A if needed. But the key piece here is if we make that investment, that's 60 billion per year over the next 10 years, there's tremendous potential to create new employment opportunities across our region at a time when the fossil fuel industry is on the decline globally, and we need to be able to create new opportunities for skilled workers across our region. And we have a chance here to make our region a leader in the renewable energy economy, in the global economy, one where fossil fuels are a smaller part of the energy mix. So that's 60 billion per year invested annually. Our estimations are that has the potential to create 270,000 direct and indirect jobs in those renewable energy industries and the jobs that supply those industries, and an additional 140,000 induced jobs as a result of the growth in those industries. So top line, we're looking at the potential for 410,000 new jobs annually across our 4-state region on average as a result of this investment. That is potentially a huge impact on our region. It could represent 2.7% of our regional labor force. It could take our unemployment, the projections are, it could take it from 8% down to 5.5% or 6%. So there's really this incredible opportunity to build out new jobs as we see the global market transition. But it's incredibly important to recognize that it's also an opportunity to create new avenues for people who are currently employed in fossil fuel related industries that are going to decline because of these global shifts and a number of other factors that are independent of anything that we might do in our own region. So we need to prepare our communities across the Ohio Valley. The analysis suggests that we could be looking at the loss of up to 100,000 jobs in fossil fuel related industries by 2030 across our region. That includes about 40,000 jobs in fossil fuel related industries in West Virginia alone. That is a massive impact in West Virginia, where that's about 5.4% of overall employment. Similarly high, not as high, but it's also high impact in Kentucky and in Pennsylvania and in Ohio. And so those folks who are in those jobs now are going to need places to go and alternatives. And so part of what we're suggesting here in this report is that if we make these investments, there will be opportunities to work with these communities, to work with the companies that are active in these communities and those governments to provide new opportunities for folks and do a phased just transition so that we're not leaving people further behind in communities that do not have won't have the resources to support those people and those families. So getting ahead of it with this potential for investment here. It's also critical to recognize at this point that those job impacts won't be felt equitably or evenly distributed across the states. They'll be concentrated in particular areas. In Ohio, for example, that 0.9%, about 10 counties in Ohio will be hit hardest by the loss of fossil fuel related industries. So I want to underscore again the importance of making these opportunities, these collaborative opportunities available both for rural and urban and suburban communities to negate some of these impending negative impacts. And the last thing I'll mention today for the purposes of the conference, and I'll emphasize that please invite you all to read the report in its entirety, is as Grant mentioned at the start, we already have examples of regional successes right here in the Ohio Valley. There are examples in Cincinnati of the country's largest solar project, which is being implemented with a project labor agreement in place that is being very intentional about the representation of companies that are involved in building that project. It's about bridging rural and urban communities there. In Pittsburgh, we have a number of strategies for procurement and pension funds, municipal pension funds being used for more economically targeted investments. Columbus has also adopted some strategies for clean energy aggregation. And in Eastern Ohio, in Youngstown, we're seeing the transformation of Youngstown's economy with the investment in electric vehicle manufacturing at Lordstown Motors. as well as batteries being now increasingly coming online as a key part of their economic strategy. So if we can really tie in all of those strengths across our region, Grant alluded earlier to the idea of a circular regional economy. We have a history in our region of manufacturing steel that's going into production processes in another state that's being used in another state. I mean, we could imagine here that the city of Pittsburgh is using electric vehicles that are manufactured at a facility in Youngstown, Ohio, that's using steel that's coming from other parts of the region as well. So this ability to build on each other's successes and really scale up impact is pretty incredible here. So we see this as an important piece to emphasize. We have regional strengths. So just to wrap everything up, I want to emphasize that now that the roadmap is officially released, we are looking to build out those coalitions of stakeholder groups that we mentioned, bringing as many people into this conversation and going to people in different communities with this conversation as possible. Want to think about hosting investor roundtables to really identify those capital opportunities and match them with projects that exist. Many of the cities in our region already have completed climate action plans or sustainability plans, and they know what projects they would build that would get us closer towards this regional sustainable future economy, but they need funding. So we need to sort of match some of those relationships as well. And of course, as I mentioned, there's some policy work to do. So to close out, I will leave this slide up unless you'd like me to take it down, or I can put it back up after Lindsay and the mayor's remarks. But you can download the report on the Center for Sustainable Business website. We also have 2 social media outlets that we're using to continue the conversation about the plan on Twitter and on Facebook. And with that, I would like to turn it over to Lindsay Powell, who's the Assistant Chief of Staff for Mayor Peduto.
Wonderful, Leslie, thank you so much. And thank you for the ability to talk about this exciting work. I especially want to thank members of my team who championed and led this from the beginning, including Hirsch Merenstein, Haley Platt, and Ernest Rajacone, who've been masterful in bringing this together and thinking through the unique issues that Middle America faces. You know, while we've heard about the why we need to focus on Middle America, we haven't yet shared how we're focusing on Middle America, and particularly the equity lens that's necessary to make sure that we're addressing both the issues of the urban core and rural areas that often mirror each other and stem from the same unequal systems. As we build a clean, new economy for Appalachian regions, we need to explore and address how these issues disenfranchise both areas. Equity issues and upending unfair systems shouldn't be the goal of just urban cities, because a rising tide lifts all boats. When we're talking about environmental equity or environmental justice in cities, and including here at home, it may look like addressing the fact that Black children significantly have higher rates of asthma and hospitalization for asthma than their white counterparts in neighborhoods right across from their own. In more rural environments, environmental justice may look more like addressing the long-term health effects that fossil fuel-related industries like coal and steel have had on one's health and the environment. When we're talking about equitable workforce or workforce development, like in this Marshall Plan for Middle America, we're talking about building a more equitable society that includes everyone, that creates an economy where people of all skill sets, of all levels can find work, and a new economy where one can make dignified wages, family-sustaining wages. This green economy will create new jobs, not erase them, and will provide opportunities for all of us in an equitable and sustainable manner. This work is critical to ensuring that as we move forward, we're addressing the unique needs that Middle America faces. And that's not just a city by city approach, but a regional approach that understands, again, how important it is to make this transition to a new green economy that lifts us all up. Next, I'd like to virtually hand it over to Mayor William Peduto with some final remarks.
Thank you, folks. Incredible team, and really during this pandemic, one of the most enjoyable endeavors I've had the opportunity to work on. There was a lot of energy that was created not only by the people that we spoke with, but by labor leaders, by environmentalists. I want to thank Mayor Williams of Huntington, West Virginia, Mayor Delaney of Morgantown, West Virginia, Mayor Brown of Youngstown, Ohio, Mayor Whaley of Dayton, Ohio, Mayor Ginther of Columbus, Ohio, Mayor Cranley of Cincinnati, Ohio, and Mayor Fisher of Louisville, Kentucky. Together, the 8 cities have decided that instead of trying to put together an economic development strategy, instead of trying to put together an environmental strategy, instead of trying to put together a social justice strategy independently, that we have the power and the ability to work through a 4-state region and to approach this idea as one that can be modified and changed depending on the metro area that you work in and live in and represent, but at that same time, putting together a federal structure around it, much like we did for Europe after World War II. The amount of money that we're talking about for the entire northern Appalachia, the entire Ohio Valley, is significantly less than what we put into Germany after World War II. And we're not even asking for the full freight to be a federal program. What we're talking about is public-private partnership, working with existing companies that already call our area home and helping them to expand their operations or completely change their portfolios. We're reaching out to the coal companies. We're reaching out to the gas companies. We're reaching out to the oil companies. And we're saying, look, there's a tectonic shift happening throughout this world on where we're going with energy. And we want to be able to work with you to change and expand your portfolio into renewable energy, into the being able to be manufacturers of new systems to deliver it. And we want to specialize in different industries in each of our metro areas. In Louisville, Kentucky, Mayor Fisher will talk to you about how they're working with the University of Louisville in order to expand AI, in order to be able to expand broadband access, not just for the people of Louisville, but for the people in Kentucky. And Mayor Brown will tell you in Youngstown, Ohio, at Lordstown, how they've started to really invest heavily into the electrification of public transit. And with the announcement of the Biden administration wanting to invest in every city over $100,000 into the electrification of public transit, where should we be buying those buses from? From China or from Youngstown? Mayor Cranley has put together a public-private partnership creating the largest solar farm in all of this country. And the companies that he's partnering with already have a footprint in Pittsburgh. All of these different opportunities are already happening throughout Appalachia and throughout the Ohio Valley. What we need to do is harness that energy, pull it together, and then utilize the one thing that the 8 cities that I mentioned all have in common: academic institutions to help to bring the innovation that is necessary for 21st century jobs into these areas. Whether you're talking about Marshall University in Huntington or West Virginia University in Morgantown, Youngstown State, the University of Dayton, the University of Cincinnati, Ohio State, Louisville, Pitt, Carnegie Mellon. We're talking about this enhanced collaborative effort, an effort that can be born between environmentalists and labor, between academia and corporations, between philanthropy and government, to be able to realize the potential that is right here in all of our communities. As Lindsay stated, equitable development doesn't only apply to city neighborhoods. It's about what's happening in Connellsville. It's about what's happening in Youngstown. It's about what's happening in areas outside of the urban core that are going to be left behind. If we do nothing, over the next 10 years, our 4-state region will lose 100,000 jobs in the fossil fuel industry. 100,000 families will be without work. And all of those communities that have relied upon those industries for over a century will be left behind. If we decide to shut it down tomorrow, we'll have learned nothing from 1979 when we lost our industry and how we got knocked down to our knees. And families had to leave Pittsburgh, and young people had to leave Pittsburgh. And for 30 years, we struggled to create new industries. We must not make the same mistake twice. We have to be proactive. We need investment. We need to be able to create partnerships. And instead of burning down bridges, we need to start learning how to build them. That's what a Marshall Plan is. That's what a Marshall Plan for Middle America is. The equity that is spread from urban areas to rural areas and working together so that the jobs that we create are here 40 years from now, 50 years from now, and that those communities that surround our urban centers are benefited by the institutions of learning that are centered in those cities, and so that those communities are around 50 years from now. We've been working on this plan for years. We've been trying to find a way in order to be able to pull all stakeholders together. With our partners at Reimagine Appalachia, they have a game plan of how we can rethink about this wonderful region of our country. With this study, we now have the economic plan of how to make it happen. What we need is a federal government that believes that this region is worth investing in, and a federal government that isn't looking at our past, but is looking at our future. And I believe we have that now too. So with that, we will take some questions and hopefully give you a chance to read the report. There will be some follow-ups to this in the next couple of weeks as we start to pull together the academic institutions throughout the region.
Mayor,
Yep.
one thing that I didn't hear mentioned specifically, but I'm sure frankly I haven't read it yet, is natural gas. And coal was brought up, but natural gas is, I guess, also declining, but still a pretty significant force in our area. How do we get them on board when they are, they have a lot of power in the state government, they're still getting tax breaks and subsidies and everything else like that?
Great question, Ryan. And that tax break that they got is what we want to see available for companies that are investing in renewable energy. That could be the state's participation. And if you think about the funding, it follows very closely to transportation funding. There's a certain percentage that comes in that's a federal commitment, and then a smaller percentage that's the state, and an even smaller that is local or regional. When we're working with Heartland and the others, what we're looking at is investments that we haven't used before, pension funds of labor unions, pension funds of local governments. We want to be able to create that type of a mix so that there is the ability to match private equity. The first part of your question, I forgot already. I'm sorry.
I was just saying the natural gas industry is...
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I think I have a meeting next week with the new leadership at Peoples. But this is a conversation with the previous leadership that we began having on direct energy. So how can people start to work on creating smaller facilities that are a part of a large development like the 28 acres in the Hill or at Hazelwood Green? And then can they look to partner with other companies that are providing different sources of energy? And the conversations back when Morgan O'Brien was there was with Siemens in using hydrogen as the source. Even the area that we built in the 28 acres in the Hill District can be converted. It hasn't been built strictly to be using natural gas, but it has the ability to use any source of energy in order to be able to provide both heat and electric. That's the type of portfolio changes we'd like to see. We'd love to see Consol Energy involved in something like that, and not simply looking at just one source of energy as the only means of producing it in this region.
Yeah, kind of like what we talked about like a while ago when we had our interview
Yep,
about it.
about the Green New Deal.
Yeah, exactly. About having natural gas still be a part of it, but it can be converted later to something else. Is that right?
Exactly, but also giving the options through financial incentives to increase the portfolio of these companies. You have to realize that the world is changing and that this region cannot stop where the rest of the world is going. There's going to be limited markets for natural gas as we see over-exploration happening on a global basis. What has the answer been? Well, let's just create cracker plants. And we'll be able to, instead of using it to heat our homes, we'll use it to build out plastics. Well, plastics are going down as well, as the world is trying to wean itself off of any type of petrol-based material. So instead of the Ohio Valley becoming the petrochemical capital of America, what we're talking about is giving ourselves an opportunity to play offense, to say we can become the renewable energy and the 21st century green economy that we believe we can be. You know, one of the best examples for people who are doubters is just to go to Phipps and to see a building that is the greenest building in the world. It has met the living building challenge, which means it uses the same amount of energy as a flower. There's no water hooked up to it, it uses rain. There's no electricity coming into it, it creates its own power. In almost every single part of it was designed, engineered, and manufactured in a 100-mile radius. That they were able to build the greenest building in the world with companies that exist here right now. What if we gave those companies the opportunity to expand and to be able to ship their materials around the country and around the world, and to be able to stay in the towns that they've been for generations? That's the type of direct investment that's needed. And I certainly believe that Western Pennsylvania can be the leader in the green building revolution.
Mayor, how do you sell this to a sometimes skeptical community that some folks mock your bike lane?
Yeah. I just say this, it's the direction that the world's going. And for so many decades, we were stuck. You know, after the steel industry collapsed, Pittsburgh was always viewed as being the place that was 10 years behind the time. That old joke, you know, where you want to be when the world ends, Pittsburgh, because you'd still get 10 more years. Like, people don't tell that joke anymore. And there's a reason. And it's not just because of the institutions in Oakland. There have been companies that have understood and have been innovating, but we haven't done enough in order to be able to help them. And what I would say, especially to neighbors in surrounding counties, is this is not trying to take your job from you. This is not trying to drive a factory that you have relied on for generations out. It's to make sure that there's something there for your children, and that there's a future for your children to stay in that same town that you got married in and raised them in, so they can do the same. The beautiful part about Western Pennsylvania is all of those little towns that you go through all have their unique character. And they all sort of rely upon Pittsburgh as being the economic engine that will help to continue to get them going. What I would say to those that are skeptical, give us an opportunity. We're looking to invest in your areas so that the city and the heart of this region can remain healthy.
Mayor, you must be encouraged with a change of administration in Washington, might be more friendly toward this. What's your view of that? What difference it's going to make?
Right.
And have there been any preliminary discussions with Mr. Biden's?
Yeah, all the way to the policy director of the campaign since August. You know, we were talking about maybe releasing this before the election and trying to capitalize on the discussion that happened through the debates. But because it became so polarizing on just fracking, we felt it was better to wait until after the election had happened. So we have been in touch with the Biden campaign basically since this summer on a weekly basis. And the discussion of a Marshall Plan has been at the forefront of it. Also on a weekly basis with pollster who was in charge of Pennsylvania, Celinda Lake. And one of the people in CB had brought him involved into this early on is, I'm not sure exactly what his title is, but Jeffrey Sachs from Columbia University, who was Bernie Sanders' economic advisor and one of the collaborators of the Green New Deal, who has been involved in this since the beginning. He also runs the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Sustainable Solutions Network for the United Nations. And understands that it's not one size fits all. This country, parts of the country are already 100% renewable, while areas like ours are powered by coal and nuclear. And you simply can't say on day one, we're going to shift everything. Number one, it's physically impossible. And number two, it would be economically devastating to areas that would then be left behind.
What is the plan for nuclear with this plan? I know we have a plant in Midland.
Yeah, we don't go specifically into the options of the energy soup in the report. It's more of an economic development report that looks to check the boxes of social equity, environmental protection, and economic growth for both urban and rural areas. But I would assume that as you start looking at different options of powering Western Pennsylvania, there's some margins that are difficult to maintain. When we were building that facility in Midland, it was powering the Beaver Valley, which had mills up and down the river. And those needs are significantly less. When we start building out new buildings that are net zero, the need for that type of level of energy may be diminished.
One last thing. You mentioned the steel collapse. Pittsburgh really never got a bailout or any federal investment a la the auto industry that happened after the recession in 2008.
Yep.
But we don't know where the Senate's going to be. The possibility of it flipping or something like that this year. How do you sell the need for the federal government investment in this kind of plan right now?
I would say that during the past 20 years, we've seen in the more rural communities the same type of economic collapse, only on a slower basis, that we saw in the 1980s. And we haven't done anything in order to be able to address it. From Kentucky to Pittsburgh, from the bottom of West Virginia up to basically the Great Lake region, there has been a lack of investment, which has left this entire region behind the rest of the country. Despite the example that Pittsburgh has been able to show in its resilience, that was a 30-year overnight success story. And people don't know how much we had to suffer in order to be able to get to where we are today. I don't want to see this entire region go through that. And if we don't have a proactive strategy that invests directly into this region, we will create two Americas. And it won't be cities and rural. It will be areas of this country that aren't a part of the 21st century economy. Okay. Again, thank you to everybody up on the screen. Thank you, Grant Irvin. I'm going to give it back to you to end this. And like I said, there will be more news coming about this, but in the meantime, is the report available right now? It is online?
Yes.
Okay. I would just ask folks to make a link to it so that others can read it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, speakers and members of the press. Just to kind of reiterate a couple of the next steps, all the information will be available both on the city website and the Center for Sustainable Business website at the University of Pittsburgh. A few kind of just housekeeping items. As Leslie mentioned, there will be future community engagement and dialogue that we will be engaging in with members of the community, both about kind of the topics in the report and the research and the findings, but also the opportunities forward. The second is we hope to engage both federal and state and other local leaders in a robust policy development conversation with regards to how do you take this policy work and put it into action. The third is that we'll be linking local projects with investors. We've had ongoing conversations with one of our partners that's been mentioned, the Heartland Investors Network, who is private capital, who's actively interested in investing in our communities and in these projects. And then fourth, and maybe just as fundamental, is the idea of expanding this network. The work that we've done over the past several months literally just scratches the surface in terms of both the opportunity and the need, but also in terms of the pathway forward. So we'll look to engage other communities, other corporations, research universities, and community and civic entities to be a part of the work going forward. So with that, I'd like to thank our speakers, thank all of our team here at the City of Pittsburgh, the production team for putting this together, and thank you all for being with us today. Have a great day. Thank you.